This presentation is presented by Dr. Bhero, and it's part of a series in the College of Agriculture, Engineering and Science, and it is spearheaded by the Dean of Teaching and Learning, Professor Naveen Chetty, and it is especially relevant in terms of the DALRO specifications sent out yesterday by the Copyright Office. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Bhero. Thank you.
Thank you, Naresh. Before I start, let me try to share my screen so that I can start. You know, these technology things. Okay. I'm still looking for my. Yeah, I'm still looking for my screen. Show taskbar, then the Zoom. I'm not sure. Is everybody able to see my PowerPoint now? Naresh? Naresh? Hello? Hello, Naresh?
Yes, we are able to see you.
Are you able to see my PowerPoint?
Yes, we are.
You're able to see. Okay, no, then that's all right. I can start. Okay. Okay, colleagues, the presentation that I'm going to present, the title is Ethics and Online Teaching and Learning. This is a very, very important topic now that we are moving into online learning. There are a few blind spots that, you know, we need to remind one another as we move into this uncharted water of online teaching. The outline of this presentation is as follows. We will start by looking at the definition of ethics. Needless to really define this term, because most of you probably know it better. And I must emphasize this is a much bigger topic, you know, than we can deal with in this short presentation. Then we'll look at why ethics awareness is important. We'll also look at ethics in research, just briefly. And why this is important is because as we teach, we have to do some bit of research or a lot of research that helps us in teaching. Then we're going to look at ethics in teaching. Now, under ethics in teaching, we are going to touch some of the issues that Niresha has just highlighted, the copyright issues as it were. I noticed that in the email that was sent yesterday, there were a few points that were actually not highlighted there. And I'll use this opportunity to also to highlight those. Then we'll look at ethics in learning. We'll look at the importance of ethical professional conduct, and of course, we conclude with some remarks. Now, the question, what is ethics? Like I said at the beginning, this is a very, very wide topic, and what we are able to do here is just to scratch a surface, you know, of it. And the definition says it is a branch of philosophy concerned with finding moral principles which assist in determining what is good or what is not good for individuals, organizations, and society. But ethics in education is actually more narrowed up. We take a small chunk from the whole field of ethics. And in ethics in education, of course, depending on the objectives and the perspective, is quite different and has quite many different characterizations. However, our main consideration in this presentation is more concerned with professional and scholastic honesty and integrity, among other characterizations. Stated briefly, The moral philosophies that are quite leading, there is the so-called the Kantian ethics, and there is the so-called the utilitarian ethics. And of course, as I defined at the beginning, they seek to find principles that guide human conduct for the better or for the good of the society. Kantian ethics, sometimes called Kantian moral imperatives, it states that in deciding whether an act is moral, one has to consider whether it would be in the best interest of society if everyone else acted that same way. In other words, before you do any action, just consider it and say, look, if everybody else in the world acted this same way, was the world going to be a better world? If your answer is no, then you know the conduct is not good. Utilitarian ethics, on the other hand, which is an outcome-based principle, it states that in a given situation, the most ethical decision or conduct is the one that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Now, the question is, why is ethics awareness important? There are so many ways in which we can motivate why this is important, but a few have been selected. And figure 1 shows an ideal educational process as proposed by Muhammad. Now, in this figure, you notice that we have a student coming into an educational system. So here we have the educational system there. But within the educational system, the student will learn the domain knowledge, be it engineering, be it science, be it physics, you name it. But also what is important is that ethical and moral values, they also have to be instilled within the educational process as it were. And then the output, according to Muhammad, which is the ideal setup that I believe all right-minded institutions and people should work towards, is to produce professional graduates equipped with morals. Now, according to Erickson, more than $1 trillion is paid in bribes every year worldwide. And Jiang also stressed the negative impact of corruption on the development when they stressed that corruption is not conducive to development of the economy and society. According to Moore, students who do an ethics course or training before embarking on e-learning are less likely to cheat compared to students who would not have taken an ethics course or training, as it were. Now, this is quite important. I think we have, administrators, we have policymakers here, and this knowledge or this understanding becomes important that, look, we are moving into online learning. Now, if these findings are true by these other researchers, then it means somehow we must make our students become conscious of ethical principles. The news on professional malpractices by lawyers, engineers, medical doctors, accountants, and so forth is common knowledge and deserves no further discussion. The situation ought to be better for a better world for which all human-minded people aspire. It is indeed an endless list of corrupt and unethical conduct, which is done by not only ordinary people, but also professional people. And it is without a shadow of doubt that corruption slows down development, development of markets. It discourages investors. It increases cost of running business. It reduces competitiveness. It undermines the rule of law, and it also weakens the institutional foundations upon which economic growth depends upon. It is against this realization that educational institutions and society in general are enjoined to double their effort to improve ethical awareness of both students, who are our future professionals and leaders, as well as ordinary and professional personnel. And it must be emphasized once more that we all have civic and moral duty to partake in this all-important human endeavor. For the greater ethics in research, now on the aspect of ethics in research, I have included this just to make this presentation a little bit more complete. But it's a much bigger topic in itself but otherwise, the main focus is really the ethics in teaching and learning, but this feeds in a way into it. So we know that for the greater part, a constant target of research is to support sustainable development with the key focus of improving the quality of life of humanity, and at the same time protecting the environment upon which life depends. And as a result, researchers have civic and moral duty to ensure the following, among others. And I'll quickly go through this. The first one is protecting the dignity, the rights, and the safety, as well as and the well-being of all actual and prospective research participants, people, animals, and the environment. It's in the full interest of actual, prospective, or research participants concerned communities, animals, and the environment, and should have due regard for the relevant regulatory frameworks, agencies, and all applicable laws. And needless to overemphasize the need to acknowledge the work done by others by properly citing all prior work used in one's work. And the email we received yesterday about copyright, I think it is one of those items that it was highlighting. Let's move on. Ethics in research. Safeguarding the resources by ensuring that research with no meaningful benefit to the community is avoided. And the resources, we must remember, include financial resources, human, material, and time resources. Research objectives, therefore, and hypotheses or research procedure must be designed and or aligned in order to produce impeccable objective results, of course, within the relevant context. Higher institutions of learning or universities are places where rigorous research or rigorous search for the truth is one of the core functions. Therefore, researchers must engage in robust and active critical thinking in carrying out their research. And here I'm I was tempted to quote a definition of critical thinking that was written by Velendin. According to Velendin, he says, critical thinking is the active application of principles of reasoning to your own ideas and those of others, to make judgments about communication and reasoning, to analyze arguments, to expose underlying assumptions, to achieve better understanding, and to approach the truth. And in this case, I really would underline this, and to approach the truth. That's what we do in institutions of learning. We try to look for the truth. And I found this definition to be very, very much telling. Ethics in teaching. Now, ethics in teaching has many strands. As much, of course, as ethics in research and learning. And these strands include the legal aspect, the best interest of students aspect, the best interest of society aspect, and the best interest of a profession or domain knowledge aspect. These aspects influence and inform ethics in teaching in various ways, including the following. The first one, the legal aspect. This comes into play because educators often work under employment contract to teach, among other functions. This then creates rights, duties, and obligations for the contracting parties, that is, the educators and the employers, and of course, the other contracting party, in other words. Of the many elements of legal aspect, we have elected to briefly discuss the copyright element only, and specifically on the following aspects. And the reason for this is that copyright speaks more to what we are talking about now and the teaching, the teaching aspect. But the points that we are going to consider include the following. In South Africa, as in other jurisdictions, the following legislation may be used to protect one's ideas, inventions, designs, literary work, artistic work, dramatic work, etc. And these legislation or acts include the Copyright Act, the Patents Act, the Trademarks Act, the Designs Act, the Plant Breeders' Rights Act, and so forth. On the matters of teaching, copyright appears to be the most appropriate one in protecting one's own work. For instance, slides, lecture notes, using, of course, other people's work as the case might be, and the ethical issues that may arise therefrom. In terms of the Copyright Act, Section 2, for work to be eligible for protection, it must be original and it must have been reduced to material form, written down or recorded. The protection is generally automatic once one has complied with these requirements. I think in the email sent by the registrar yesterday on copyright, there is a statement that I remember there where they actually say it must have been reduced to material form, and they gave examples of what it meant to be reduced to material form. So generally, the Act defines what the material form is, but the examples are these given, written down, recorded, etc. The protection in the present context, as given in Section 6 and Section 9 of the Copyright Act, provides the protected with the exclusive right to present the work in public or their work in public, to distribute it, copying it, reproducing it, adapting it, and so forth. And this also in the email that came yesterday, they briefly highlighted, on this aspect. And this is actually the protection is provided by the Copyright Act. The protected, nevertheless, can give permission or license to a third party. And I again refer to the email yesterday where they were making reference to DALRO, which is Dramatic Arts Literary Rights, organization, the one that protects or oversees the licensing of copyrightable material. So that email made reference, to DALRO. Section 12 of the Copyright Act provides exceptions to the protection, and the exceptions include the following: non-infringement by any fair dealing or use of the work for purposes of research or private study, non-infringement by any fair use for the purposes of criticism or review of the work, and so forth. Here, I must also highlight that in the email that came yesterday, the consultant in the submissions by the university consultant on copyright and the related, legal, rights, mentioned that academics, in order to avoid infringing on some copyright, what they can do is to simply give a link to their students to some online material. The idea there is that the Copyright Act under Section 12, it actually allows one to copy work for private study, and that person cannot be sued for infringing the copyright. But then once you use that material in a public format, like in our classes, you use it, then you will be infringing on the Copyright Act. So I was just highlighting and expanding on that point from the email yesterday. The copyright ownership in employer relationship, as in the case of academics, is clarified in Section 21 and other relevant sections of the Copyright Act. According to Section 21, when one creates copyrightable work while it's working in the course and scope of one's employment, then the copyright vests in the employer. However, some protection acts, as well as some employers, often provide for benefits sharing, royalties where applicable. I think I must highlight and expand this point as well, because in the email of yesterday, much of the discussion was actually on the not infringing the copyrights of other people who have published their books, be it hard copies, online, as the case might be, and what we needed to do in order to work within the limits of the licenses that we have. But what I did not see in the email yesterday was that when we, as academics, produce work, our slides, our notes, etc., who owns the copyright, as it were. But in terms of Section 21, it actually tells us that the owner or the copyright vests with the employer according to this section. So I thought I should highlight that further. We must then ask, what then are the ethical issues on the legal aspect? Three aspects deserve to be mentioned, and these aspects, which I'll take very quickly, include the following. Employment contracts are general service delivery contracts where the employee has a duty to render services in return for pay package. And any failure to render acceptable service, teaching and compiling up-to-date standard teaching material amounts not only to unethical professional conduct, but also to a breach of employment contract. Secondly, in compiling teaching material, the teaching academics ought to compile up-to-date material so as not only provide students, our future professionals, with up-to-date domain knowledge, but also to protect the name of the employer for obvious reasons. Thirdly, failure to respect the work of others by properly citing it in one's own work where appropriate, and thereby infringing the copyright of others and violating anti-plagiarism principles. That's ethics questions in regards to legal aspect. Now we go to number 2, which is the aspect of the best interest of students. It is without doubt that students are the main and the majority clients or customers at any educational institution. It is common knowledge that every right-minded business ought to know that clients, customers are the king, and they are at the center of everything done by a business in the course of its business. Hartman et al. Enumerated a number of principles that informs instructional code of ethics. And among the principles identified by Hartman, was the need to make the well-being of students the fundamental value for all decision making. And they also listed honesty and integrity in fulfilling professional responsibilities as the other principles, of course, among many others. Starrett, a respected researcher in educational matters, strongly challenges educators to become ethical leaders with an understanding that the learning process is profoundly a moral activity that should engage the full humanity of the entire educational community. SARIT further emphasizes that educational leadership requires a profound and moral commitment to high quality learning for all students. In addition, that this commitment needs to be based on 3 essential virtues. And the virtues are proactive responsibility, personal and professional authenticity, and an affirming, critical, and enabling presence for the work involved in teaching and learning. From the above discussion, it therefore follows that ethics in teaching encompasses promoting the best interest of students at all times, with, of course, all the necessary balancing acts or decisions. The third element, the best interest of society, 2 leading ethical or moral philosophies presented earlier on, that is the Kantian ethics and the utilitarian ethics. These moral principles suggested 2 distinct guiding considerations on moral issues. And these guiding considerations include, the first one is whether a particular act, decision will promote greater good or happiness for the greatest number of people. And the second one is whether a particular act or decision would be good if everyone else engaged in the same act, decision, or conduct. Given this background, it follows that from an ethical standpoint, educators have to consider whether what they are teaching their students will assist the students to become competent and moral professionals capable of contributing positively to societal development and greater good. The fourth, the last consideration in terms of ethics in teaching, the best interest of profession or domain knowledge aspect. This aspect is discussed in detail in a subsequent section. However, here suffice to say, educators often belong to clearly defined knowledge areas and or distinct professional areas, and they are reasonably expected to contribute to the development of their knowledge areas and or professions. Therefore, educators, when teaching, are expected to be mindful of these inherent moral duties or ethical considerations. From the above discussion on ethics in teaching, it follows that educators have to be aware of these ethical strands in teaching, and they ought to practice these teaching ethical imperatives at all times. The next is ethics in learning. According to DIAS, many researchers have highlighted that e-learning is concentrating mainly on teaching and learning and teaching methods, but caring less for the betterment and advancement of society. Undoubtedly, this is a lamentation on morality aspect. According to Baskova et al., the possible e-learning environment, fraud include examination assistance, writing assistance and tutoring, misrepresentation in the collection and reporting of data, improper use of academic resources. Here, they also identified disrespecting the work of others, failure to protect human animal subjects in research, breaching of computer use ethics, failure to adhere to copyright protection, providing inappropriate assistance to others, and a failure to adhere to academic regulations as other forms of malfeasance. The causes and possible fraudulent or malfeasant conduct in e-learning environment is not difficult to understand or imagine. The difficulty lies in finding effective and plausible remedies or mitigating measures or effective remedial and mitigating measures is bound to, well, I retake that. And plausible remedies and mitigating measures is bound to assist one, that is student, educators, and other concerned parties in safeguarding against the malfeasance. A number of researchers, some listed below, have weighed in identifying some causes of malfeasance and suggesting at the same time mitigating measures. Starrett, the one we mentioned before, identified 3 virtues, namely responsibility or authenticity and presence, which if students observed would reduce malfeasance in education. He said students must accept their responsibilities regarding the courses they take and participate authentically, bearing in mind to care for the other members of learning community. This point allow me, Chair, to digress a bit. I often tell my students in class that, you know, when they do not come to class, they are actually equally disadvantaging their fellow students, because when we are a complete class, you never know who is going to ask a very good question that we all are going to learn from, or who is going to make a very interesting suggestion that we all going to learn from. So this point that I've just taken actually speaks to that, you know, philosophy that I've always used in my classes. And I resume and say, Haghe weighed on this point and said the problem often arises because students tend to be unaware of their ethical responsibilities. At the very beginning, it is suggested the educational institutions must determine what they expect or what it expects from the instructors, educators, and students. Muhammad identified the lack of face-to-face interaction in e-learning as compared to traditional classroom interaction among students and teachers as the root cause of ethical dilemma. And this, all of us educators must think about it very carefully, because we are now replacing the face-to-face kind of interaction with e-learning platforms, as the case might be. In another study, Baskova recommended that focus in e-learning should be on student-teacher communication in the forums using, say, video conference, webinar, and so forth, which would stand as a better substitute of the traditional class setting. This would permit, to some extent, the traditional rubbing off of moral traits to students. So in an earlier study, it appears Baskova was speaking to the point raised by Muhammad to say the face-to-face, lacking of face-to-face. So what we must take out of this is that as we teach our students, we must try to interact with them as often as is possible. And this is one of the ethical considerations found in learning. In a certain survey, a 7-year survey done by Moore, and as confirmed by a similar independent study at the University of Kentucky Philosophy Department, it was found out that students who took an analytic and ethics philosophy course before embarking on e-learning were less likely to commit fraudulent acts. It was also found out that the students had become more developed in their ability to, and I quote, analyze, develop, and formulate logical arguments, ability to make knowledgeable decisions, examining thoroughly the consequences of various actions, aptitude to examine various angles of topics, ability to write and speak clearly, and to effectively interpret and assess various thoughts and theories. Beloved students, fellow educators, and all others, who wouldn't like to develop these kind of skills? I would like to develop them. If studying a little bit of philosophy, moral philosophy allows us to develop that, I would like to do that. Students are strongly reminded that moral acts include even the handing in of assignments on time. Now, we are towards the end here. Importance of ethical professional conduct. I must highlight here the debate on whether there should be a separation of the expected ethical standard between professional conduct and social conduct has been ongoing for some time. One view suggests that what happens in one's private time or social time should not have any bearing on one's professional ethical standing. While the other view suggests that morality is morality, irrespective of whether the detestable conduct was done under social or professional setup. These are the two far ends in this debate. However, the middle ground says, which is the alternative suggestion, it says that separation between ethical professional and ethical social conduct diminishes as the social status or standing or position of an individual increases in society. And what do you think, dear colleagues? I tend to agree with the middle point that the higher the position one acquires in society, the more the line separating between social and professional, the more thinner it becomes. That's what I think. But think about it, colleagues. Professional ethical conduct. Now, notwithstanding the contrasting views on social and professional ethical conduct, it is without a shadow of doubt that a lack of professional ethical conduct at the bare minimum has far-reaching adverse consequences on societal development. It is for this reason that the majority of professional bodies have strict regulatory code of conduct for their members. The following excerpts from the codes of conduct from various professional bodies clearly illustrate the importance of maintaining high professional ethical standards. And I've just taken three different bodies. The first one is Health Professions Council of South Africa. The Code of Ethical Conduct lists a number of ethical imperatives for guiding medical profession practice. But before they gave their listing, there is a section which is entitled The Spirit of Professional Guidelines. I found that to be very interesting, and it reads as follows. To be, and I quote, to be a good healthcare practitioner requires a lifelong commitment to sound professional and ethical practice and an overriding dedication to the interests of one's fellow human beings and society. In essence, the practice of healthcare profession is a moral enterprise. And I think this statement applies to all professions, professional people, as the case might be. The ethical guidelines list the following, and I shall not take all of them one by one as my time, as we approach our recess time, but they highlighted human rights, integrity, truthfulness, and humanity among the most important, guiding principles when one is practicing as a medical practitioner. The next one I extracted from Engineering Council of South Africa. I will also not take every point, but what I would pick some of them, and it actually says registered persons, for instance, professional engineers must discharge their duties to their employers, clients, associates, and the public with integrity, fidelity, and honesty. And this applies to us colleagues as we teach our students, as we do our work. Registered persons must not engage in any act of dishonest, corruption, or bribery. And the other points, that also follow, registered persons must order their conduct to uphold the dignity, standing, and reputation of the profession. And this must really inform us how important it is to be really ethical when practicing. The last professional body that I considered was the Legal Practice Council of South Africa. And one point that it highlights, it says that legal practitioners shall maintain the highest standards of honesty and integrity. Legal practitioners shall treat the interests of their clients, for us, our clients are our students, as paramount, and that their conduct shall be subject to the maintenance of the ethical conduct prescribed by this code and any other applicable code. And in addition, before a legal practitioner can be allowed to practice, the practitioner must first pass the so-called fit and proper person test, which must be motivated before a high court. And until a high court accepts that the person is a fit and proper person, that person will not be allowed to practice, as it were. Now, the concluding remarks, we all have moral and civic duty to maintain high levels of professional integrity. These values ought to be inculcated in all students long before they become professionals. And remember, excellence is not an event. It is actually a habit, right? And this is according to Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers that I have so much respect for. And my interpretation of this is that, whatever you do, you must do it excellently all the time, not only on a Sunday, not only on a Monday, not only on a Wednesday, but excellently all the time. Excellence is a habit, not an event. Allow me to conclude, colleagues. These are references. And Siyabonga, thank you. Dank, Mazita. Narisha.
Thank you, Dr. Bhero.
Yes, you're welcome.
We have a few questions which I think we should answer. Would you answer them live? I think
yes.
We can start with the last one first. It says, will these slides be made available for refreshment and instructing students registered in the different modules? Would you be able to make these
I have no
available?
with it. Niresha?
Yes.
I have no problem making the slides available. I will freely make them available, yes.
Okay. I'd also like to add that these sessions are being recorded and they will be placed in on the website, the teaching and learning website for the college. So you'll have this workshop there as well. And then there was another question, what instrument is available in the online teaching platform for teaching ethics to students, and who is responsible for teaching this to students?
Naresh, my honest answer is that I'm not aware who is responsible, for it. What I just did in this presentation is I was requested to compile this presentation. I think my colleagues, some of my colleagues in engineering, they know I read a lot of philosophy and ethical things a lot. So they asked me to put this together. But as far as the university-wide arrangement, I'm not aware of that. And I would just make my recommendation also that to say that I think let's talk to the responsible people and maybe let's really make ethics teachings or training be available to our students as much as is possible. I think that's the answer that I can give.
And then,
Marisha,
yes, thank you. Then the next question was, how do I secure copyright for my original teaching materials?
Okay, I think I'll give the answer in two stages. The first one that I would highlight is that, the moment you write your material, you have written it down or you have recorded it, that mere act makes you comply with the relevant section in the Copyright Act, which I think it's section 6, I think, where it says the moment you reduce your work into a written form, recorded form, etc., automatically copyright kicks in to protect you. Normally you have no need to actually go and register for a protection. However, people take, what can I say? People try to be doubly sure, and they approach organizations such as DALRO to say, guys, may you kindly manage my copyright. I've produced this. Make sure you provide the licenses and help possibly to sue people who might have infringed that copyright. The second leg of my answer is that, but please remember, whatever slides that we produce, the lecture materials that we produce in our course and scope of employment, they automatically vest on the university. The copyright owner is actually the university. That's in terms of the Copyright Act. So I hope that answer helps you.
Thank you. I think the next one says, if a lecturer gets a PDF from the internet, can he or she place this on Moodle for students' use? What are the restrictions on the kinds of documents that can be placed on Moodle?
Okay, thank you. I think one of the things is that you remember what we get from the online. We have the so-called open access and the non-open access. If it's open access, it means really anyone can actually access that particular resource, online. When you get something from an open source, as the case might be, that you can easily share it with your students without adverse repercussions. But if it's not from an open access source, you generally have no right to distribute it, because the Copyright Act protects, it gives exclusive right to the copyright owner to distribute whatever work that they've produced, to modify it, to present it, to whatnot. So distribution is one of those protected acts. So if you go on to distribute the work that belongs to somebody else without their permission, then you'll be infringing their copyright, right there. However, I think you must have noticed in the email yesterday, one of the things is that those copyright owners who have put their work under DALRO, for instance, and also PASA, Publishers Association of South Africa, for example, normally they can allow universities to say, you know what, if you are going to distribute part of my book to your students, do not distribute more than 10%. The moment you go beyond 10%, then it means you have to be paying some royalties, as the case might be. If you are not, then you'll be infringing their copyright. I guess I have not missed any other part of your question, but that's what I can say.
Okay, thank you. And then there was a suggestion that maybe students should have some kind of course, about the ethics of online learning. So I think that's a good suggestion. I think
and I add my weight to that suggestion.
One of our participants.
I was just saying, Narisha, I was just saying I add my weight to that suggestion. I strongly think it will be a very good thing to do. There has to be an ethics course given to all our students, it really can transform students. I speak from experience myself. I did a lot of ethics. I studied a lot of ethics material. And when I look at the time before studying ethics and the time after studying ethics, I think I became a slightly different person, after studying, ethics, as it were. So I strongly agree with that suggestion.
Prof. Ignatius, you have your hand up.
Yeah, my question is also still linked to copyright. Yeah, and suppose the work is mine and is published already. Does it exclusively still remain my publisher's responsibility to make that work available, or accept that that work should be available to my students? Yeah.
If I may just clarification, you, for instance, you have written a book and you published it with a certain publisher, yes, and then you are now asking whether you can now distribute your work to your own students. Did I understand the question correct?
I'm thinking here of a paper that I have written, and I want it to be available to my students when they're working to give some assignment in. Can I use that, my work? Can I be able to place that work as one of the works they can use to come up with a solution to a problem?
If it is your own work, but I think the moral step to take in this case is to alert your publisher that this is what you intend doing. Because normally when you publish, I think there are possible options where, you still retain, the copyright yourself, but also certain publishers, the publishers will have the copyright. So you may need to analyze as to which applies to you. But I think the safer step is to simply alert your publisher to say, look, I intend doing this, and I require your blessing. Then you can share that material with your students.
Okay, we have another hand up, Moses Opeku. You are.
Okay. Thank you, Narisha. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So
yes, I can.
To add strength to Bhero's answer to the last question, it depends on the content of what you signed as copyright release to the publisher while you were publishing the article. You should go through the content of your signed release to them. If it does not restrict you using it as the author, then you are free to distribute it among your students. Some publishers will say that you need to obtain a written permission from them to do that.
Consent.
Others says that the copyright is just bad. You, the author, has the free will to put it in a domain or use it freely. That's why most authors can publish their work on places like ResearchGate and they are not arrested. And others will say, please don't leave it open. You have to request for it. So it depends on what you sign. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, that speaks to what I was saying. You must look at the agreement that you had, what it says. No, thank you for assisting there.
Thank you, Bhero.
Okay, there's another question. If the university secures a license from a publisher that gives students access to the textbook for a given period with downloadable sections and a link to the library, which of these is ethical to give to the students? Downloadable PDF of chapters or the link to the library section? I think this has been answered, but if you'd like to answer again.
Look, thank you. If the university has been given license, to that book or portions of the book, then the students can simply download it. However, the alternative suggestion of using a link, the good thing about it is that even if the university didn't have a license and you give students a link and the students download on their own, then what then happens is that they cannot be said to be infringing the Copyright Act because of that section which I highlighted in the Copyright Act, which allows people to download and use material for private study or for criticizing the work, as it were. So when they are downloading on their own, then in that case, they are generally protected by our Copyright Act in terms of the section that I mentioned.
Okay, thank you. I take it that there aren't any more questions. Prof, if you could just stop sharing your screen.
How come? Well, there's something which is hiding here.
It's just right at the top.
Yes, yeah, there it is. Okay.
Okay. So we will take, I think our next session was supposed to start at 10:30. Can we take a 5 or 10 minute break? What would be acceptable to you, Dr. Bhero?
For me, I'm ready to just go on even now, but my colleagues, if they want a 5 minutes break, that's okay with me as well.
Okay, let's take a 5 minute break.
Okay.
And then we'll be back in 5 minutes.
Do we log off temporarily?
No, you can just stay on the screen and put your sound off. Put your mic on mute.